The 17th nanny was a blur of expensive tweed and shattered composure. She didn't walk down the long marble hallway of Ethan Reed's Westchester estate. She fled. A streak of what looked suspiciously like purple finger paint stained the shoulder of her jacket, and a single perfectly coiffed strand of silver hair had escaped its lacquered prison to tremble in front of her eye. She didn't look back. Not at the grand imposing oak door she'd burst through, nor at the 6 silent figures of the girls who had orchestrated her defeat, watching from the top of the sweeping staircase like a tiny, merciless jury. She clutched her handbag to her chest as if it were a life raft, her sensible heels clicking a frantic, panicked rhythm against the polished floor. Ethan stood at the bottom of the stairs, a titan of Wall Street rendered utterly powerless by a domestic insurrection. He watched her go, his jaw tight, a muscle twitching in his cheek. He could command boardrooms, orchestrate multi-billion-dollar mergers with a single steely gaze, but he could not command this. He could not fix this. The nanny, Mrs. Albright, he thought her name was, reached the front door, fumbled with the heavy brass handle for a moment that stretched into an eternity, and then she was gone, swallowed by the manicured perfection of the world outside. The door swung shut behind her with a soft, final click, a sound that echoed in the cavernous silence of the foyer with the weight of a guillotine. 17 nannies in 2 weeks. An entire army of the most qualified, experienced, and psychologically vetted caregivers in the tri-state area, all vanquished. The silence that followed was heavier, more suffocating than any of the screaming tantrums or defiant shouts that had preceded it. It was the silence of a battle won and a war lost. Ethan's shoulders slumped, the impeccable cut of his Tom Ford suit suddenly feeling like a costume for a man he no longer was. He slowly turned his gaze upward, meeting the eyes of his daughters. Olivia, the eldest at 12, stood at the forefront, her expression a cold, unreadable mask of victory. She held the memory of her mother the tightest, and therefore wielded her grief like a weapon. Beside her stood Emma, 10, her arms crossed, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes, and Mia, 8, who looked down at her feet, her quiet nature making her complicity all the more devastating. The twins, Chloe and Sofia, just 7 years old, stood hand in hand, their identical expressions a mixture of defiance and a deep childish fear they didn't understand. And peeking from behind Olivia's legs was little Isabella, only 2, her thumb in her mouth, her wide, innocent eyes reflecting the tension in the air. They were a united front, a fortress of sorrow, and he had no idea how to breach their walls. If you have ever felt that crushing weight of responsibility, the kind that steals the air from your lungs and leaves you feeling utterly alone, in a room full of people who need you, you understand the pressure building in Ethan's chest. For anyone who has faced a battle that felt impossible, let us know by leaving a like on this story. The pressure inside him was immense, a silent scream of failure. He wanted to shout, to demand an explanation, to mete out a punishment that would finally restore order. But he knew it was useless. The rules of this house were not his to make anymore. They had been written in the invisible ink of loss, and he had forgotten how to read them. But to truly understand the depth of that silence, the profound brokenness that permeated the very air in that mansion, we have to go back 8 months. 8 months ago, this house was not a fortress. It was a home. It was filled with the sound of Eleanor Reed's laughter, a sound like wind chimes that could make even the most imposing rooms feel warm and bright. She was the sun around which their entire universe orbited. She managed the chaos of 6 daughters with an effortless grace. Her love the glue that held their sprawling, beautiful, messy world together. Ethan, for all his power and wealth, was simply another planet in her orbit, drawn in by her warmth, grounded by her presence. She was the one who knew that Olivia needed to be held for 5 extra minutes at bedtime, that Mia's silence was a language all its own, that the twins' secret whispers were a sacred pact to be protected. Then, on a Tuesday in April, the sun went out, a slick road, a patch of black ice, a moment of physics and fate colliding with brutal finality. The news had come to Ethan in his corner office overlooking Central Park, a sterile phone call that had cleaved his life into 2 distinct halves, before and after. The after was this. a sprawling 30,000-square-foot monument to his grief. In the beginning, he had tried to manage it the only way he knew how, with ruthless efficiency. He hired grief counselors, scheduled playdates, filled the house with the newest toys and gadgets. He believed, with the hubris of a man who had never faced a problem money couldn't solve, that he could engineer a return to normalcy. He was wrong. His daughters didn't want a new dollhouse or a pony, they wanted their mother, and in her absence, their sorrow curdled into rebellion. It started small, a refusal to eat dinner, a forgotten homework assignment, but with each well-meaning but ultimately clueless nanny he hired, the rebellion grew, becoming more organized, more creative, more destructive. Nanny number 4, a stern British woman with impeccable references, had her prized collection of antique teacups accidentally used for a mud pie tea party in the rose garden. Nanny number 9, a cheerful psychology graduate who believed in positive reinforcement, found her car completely wrapped in toilet paper, a masterpiece of malicious teamwork orchestrated by a 12-year-old general. Nanny number 14 had quit in tears after the twins convinced her the house was haunted, using a series of baby monitors and pre-recorded whispers to stage a full-blown paranormal event in the middle of the night. Each nanny's departure was a victory for the girls, a successful defense against another woman trying to fill the unfillable void their mother had left. For Olivia, it was more than that. It was a sacred duty. Every failed nanny was a tribute to Eleanor's memory, a declaration that she was and always would be irreplaceable. Ethan's breaking point came on a Thursday afternoon. He was on a conference call, closing a deal that would net his firm hundreds of millions of dollars, when his personal assistant buzzed him. It was Ms. Davison, from Elite Childcare Solutions, the last high-end agency in New York City he hadn't yet alienated. Her voice was professionally gentle, but her words were razor-sharp. "Mr. Reed," she said, the careful diplomacy in her tone failing to mask the finality. "While we appreciate your business, we feel we are no longer equipped to meet your family's unique needs. The reports from our staff have been consistent. We must respectfully decline to place any further candidates in your home." The line went dead, and Ethan was left holding a phone that felt as heavy as a tombstone. Rejected. He, Ethan Reed, had been blacklisted. The impossible case. He ended his conference call abruptly, the thrill of the deal turning to ash in his mouth. He walked through his silent, opulent home, a gilded cage of his own making, and the sheer scale of his failure washed over him. He had wealth beyond measure, but his home was broken. He had 6 beautiful daughters, and he was losing them. Desperation led him to make a call he never would have considered before. He called Maria, the head of the cleaning service that had been with his family for years. She was a kind, no-nonsense woman who had known Eleanor well. "Maria," he said, his voice stripped of its usual authority, "I don't know what to do. I need help." He expected sympathy, perhaps a suggestion for a smaller, less-known agency. Instead, Maria was quiet for a long moment. "Mr. Reed," she said finally, "you don't need another nanny. You need something different. My niece, Sofia, she's a good girl, quiet, a hard worker. She understands." It wasn't a recommendation based on a resume. It was based on something intangible. Character, understanding. Ethan was too exhausted to argue. "Is she a nanny?" he asked. "No, sir," Maria replied. "She's a maid, but she's the one you need." Sofia Reyes lived a world away from Westchester, in a modest apartment in Queens that was filled with the scent of her younger sister's oil paints and the sound of her brother's guitar. At 25, she moved with a quiet grace that belied the weight she carried. 5 years ago, she had been on her way to Pratt, a scholarship in hand, her future a canvas of bright, limitless possibility. Then her own mother had gotten sick, a swift and merciless illness that had stolen her away and left Sofia the anchor for her younger siblings. The art scholarship was abandoned, the canvases put away. She learned to mend clothes, to stretch a budget, to listen to the silent grief of a family trying to stay afloat. She understood loss not as an event, but as a landscape you learn to navigate for the rest of your life. When her aunt called about the job, Sofia was hesitant. A mansion in Westchester felt like another planet. But Maria's words stuck with her. They are not bad kids, Sophie. They are just drowning. Her first day she arrived not in a tailored uniform, but in simple jeans and a clean faded blouse, her dark hair pulled back in a simple braid. Ethan met her at the door, his eyes tired, his handshake a formality devoid of warmth. He gave her a cursory tour of the ground floor, pointing out the endless expanses of marble to be polished, the Persian rugs to be vacuumed, the crystal that needed dusting. His voice was flat, detached, as if he were describing a museum, not a home where children lived. As he spoke, Sophia's gaze drifted past the smudges on the glass and the toys scattered across the floor. Her eyes landed on a silver picture frame, knocked over on a side table. Inside was a woman with a radiant smile, surrounded by 6 girls, their faces bright with adoration. Sophia didn't see the mess or the opulence. She saw the ghost in the machine. She felt the precise aching echo of her own past, a pain so familiar it was like a quiet hum beneath the surface of the world. After Ethan finished his instructions and retreated to his home office, a man escaping back to the one part of his life he could still control, Sophia was left alone in the grand, silent foyer. The 6 girls were nowhere to be seen, but she could feel their presence, their watchful eyes from the shadows. She knew they were testing her, waiting for her to make a move, to issue a command, to become the 18th enemy to be defeated. Instead, Sophia did none of those things. She walked over to the side table, her movements unhurried and deliberate. She picked up the fallen picture frame. With the soft sleeve of her blouse, she gently wiped a smudge from the glass, her touch lingering for a moment on the image of the smiling woman. Then she carefully stood the frame back upright, making sure it was perfectly straight, a small act of restoration in a house of chaos. She didn't say a word. She simply took a deep breath, found the cleaning supplies and began to work, her quiet presence a single, steady note in a symphony of discord. Sophia did not arrive with a color-coded schedule or a manifesto of rules pinned to a clipboard. Her authority wasn't announced. It was simply present, as quiet and unassuming as the gentle scent of lavender and lemon she carried with her. Her first act in the Reed household was not to corral the children or to demand their attention. Instead, she walked into the grand, cathedral-like living room, a space that felt more like a museum exhibit on sorrow than a place where a family lived, and picked up a silver picture frame from a dusty side table. Inside was a photograph of a woman with a smile so radiant it seemed to defy the cold, still air of the mansion. Eleanor. Sophia ran a soft cloth from her cleaning caddy over the glass, her movements slow and deliberate, erasing the film of neglect until the woman's eyes shone with captured light. The girls, scattered like forgotten dolls around the room, watched her. They expected orders, threats, or the forced, sugary cheerfulness of the nannies who had come before. They did not expect this quiet act of reverence. Her strategy, if it could be called that, was one of silent service. She moved through the house like water, finding the path of least resistance, cleaning around the chaos rather than confronting it head-on. She did not command that toys be picked up. She simply gathered them into baskets at the end of the day, placing them where they belonged. She did not insist on structured mealtimes. She just made sure that simple, nourishing food appeared on the kitchen island. Sliced apples, cheese sticks, small sandwiches, available for whenever a pang of hunger might strike. She was a ghost of competence, restoring order so subtly that the children barely noticed the shift. They only knew that the floors no longer felt sticky under their bare feet, that their favorite pajamas were always clean and folded in their drawers, and that the house was slowly, almost imperceptibly, beginning to feel less like a tomb. The true turning point began in the sunroom. It was a beautiful space at the back of the house, with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked a garden long since surrendered to weeds. But inside it had become a dumping ground for forgotten projects and discarded hopes. A large, empty corkboard, stained and pockmarked with old pinholes, dominated one wall. The previous nannies had ignored the room, writing it off as another casualty of the household's decay. Sophia saw potential. One afternoon, armed with a sponge and a bucket of warm, soapy water, she began to clean the board. The twins, 7-year-old Chloe and Sophia, appeared in the doorway, their expressions a familiar mixture of curiosity and defiance. They watched her work for 10 solid minutes, their silence a challenge. Sophia didn't turn to face them. She just kept scrubbing, her motions rhythmic and calming. "Your mother loved this room, didn't she?" she said, her voice soft, not quite a question. Sofia, the bolder of the two, finally spoke. "How would you know?" "I found a box," Sofia replied, nodding toward a dusty carton in the corner. It had fabric swatches, for curtains, all bright colors, yellows and blues, happy colors. She finished cleaning the board and dried it with a soft towel. Then she opened the box. Inside, among the swatches, were a few faded photographs that had escaped the formal albums. She pulled one out, a picture of Eleanor, laughing with a smear of paint on her cheek. With 4 simple thumbtacks, she pinned it to the center of the clean corkboard. She then took out a small, laminated recipe card for what looked like gingerbread men, written in elegant cursive. She pinned it next to the photo. Finally, she found a pressed daisy, fragile and papery, between the pages of a forgotten book. She carefully pinned it beside the recipe. She stepped back, looking at the 3 small items on the vast empty board. "This can be a memory wall," she said, still not looking directly at the twins. "A place for good memories, so we don't forget them." She left the box open on the floor and walked out of the room, leaving the invitation hanging in the air. For 2 days, the board remained unchanged. Then, on the 3rd morning, a small crayon-drawn picture of a stick-figure family under a smiling sun appeared in the bottom left corner. The next day, a photograph of the family at the beach, with Eleanor burying Ethan's legs in the sand, was tacked beside it. Sofia never mentioned it, but she felt the small additions like a shift in the atmospheric pressure, a sign that something somewhere was beginning to thaw. The scent of baking was the next weapon in her gentle arsenal. It had been 8 months since the ovens in the cavernous kitchen had been used for anything other than reheating catered meals. Sofia, having found Eleanor's worn wooden recipe box, pulled out a card so splattered with batter and smudged with fingerprints that the instructions were barely legible. Ellie's world-famous chocolate chip cookies. The title, written in a different, more masculine hand, made her smile. She laid out the ingredients on the cold marble island: flour, sugar, butter, a bowl of dark chocolate chips. The rhythmic whir of the mixer was a sound so alien in the quiet house that it acted as a summons. Chloe and Sofia were the first to arrive, their noses twitching. They stood in the doorway, silent sentinels of grief. Sofia glanced at them and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. She didn't ask if they wanted to help. She didn't coo at them or try to lure them in. She simply continued her work, but she did it inefficiently. She placed a small bowl of flour and a sifter just within their reach. She left the bag of chocolate chips open. For a long time, they just watched. Then, Chloe took a tentative step forward, dipped her finger into the chocolate chip bag and popped one into her mouth. Sofia pretended not to notice. A few minutes later, Sofia climbed onto a stool and began to sift the flour, sending a small cloud into the air that settled on her eyelashes. Soon they were both there, small hands dipping into the dough, smearing chocolate on their cheeks, their movements clumsy but earnest. Mia, the 8-year-old, watched from the shadows of the hallway. She was the family's quiet observer, the one who seemed to carry the weight of the world in her solemn, dark eyes. She didn't join the baking, but later that evening, as Sofia was folding a mountain of laundry in the quiet utility room, a task she found meditative, Mia appeared at her side. She stood there for a full minute, just watching the crisp, clean sheets being folded into perfect squares. "I have a secret," Mia whispered, her voice so faint it was almost absorbed by the soft cotton. Sofia didn't stop folding. Her hands continued their steady work, creating a space of normalcy for the confession. "Secrets are safe with me," she replied gently. "Sometimes," Mia began, her voice trembling slightly. I forget what her voice sounds like. Mom's voice. I try to hear it in my head before I go to sleep, but it's fuzzy now, and it scares me. A single tear rolled down her cheek and fell onto a freshly folded pillowcase. Sofia finally paused. She reached out and with the back of her finger gently wiped the girl's cheek. She didn't offer empty platitudes or tell her it would be okay. "I understand," she said softly. "When my mama died, I was afraid I would forget the smell of the soup she made when I was sick. For a whole year I tried to cook it, but it was never right. It made me so angry. She looked into Mia's wide, searching eyes. But one day, I stopped trying so hard, and I was just sitting in the kitchen and I smelled it, just for a second. The memory came back when I wasn't fighting for it. She gave Mia's shoulder a small squeeze. "Your mum's voice is in here," she said, tapping her own heart. "It won't ever really go away. It's just quiet sometimes." Mia didn't say anything else, but when she walked away, her shoulders seemed a little less burdened. Ethan observed all of this from a distance, a bewildered spectator in the drama of his own life. He had built an empire on predicting market trends, on understanding complex systems and exploiting their weaknesses. But this was alchemy. He would come home from his sterile glass and steel office in Manhattan, bracing himself for the oppressive silence or the shriek of a fresh argument, and instead be met with the scent of cinnamon. He saw the memory wall, which now bloomed with drawings, photos, and even a dried rose from the garden. He saw his daughters, who for months had been hostile, feral creatures of grief, slowly uncurling. He watched from his study as Sofia sat on the floor with 2-year-old Isabella, building a lopsided tower of blocks. When Isabella grew frustrated and swept the blocks away in a small storm of tears, Sofia didn't scold her. She simply started humming a Spanish lullaby, a melody so soft and sad and beautiful it seemed to weave a net of tranquility around the crying child. In moments, Isabella had crawled into her lap, her sobs subsiding into hiccups, her small hand clutching the fabric of Sofia's simple blouse. He saw not a maid or even a nanny. He saw a healer, a quiet miracle worker, who was mending the 6 shattered pieces of his heart, and in doing so was inadvertently beginning to piece his own back together. A strange, unfamiliar feeling began to take root in his chest. It was a terrifying, exhilarating flicker of hope. But not every heart in the house was ready to heal. While the younger girls orbited Sofia like small planets drawn to a new sun, Olivia, the eldest, drifted further away into the cold, empty space of her own sorrow. At 12, her memories of her mother were sharp and vivid, not the fuzzy, dreamlike recollections of her sisters. To Olivia, every smile Sofia coaxed out of Mia, every cookie Chloe baked, every moment of comfort Isabella found in the maid's arms, was a betrayal. It was an act of forgetting. Sofia was not a healer. She was an eraser, slowly wiping away the indelible mark of Eleanor Reed from their lives. So she resisted. When Sofia served the warm chocolate chip cookies, Olivia declared she wasn't hungry. When the twins excitedly tried to show her their latest drawing on the memory wall, Olivia scoffed and said it was childish. She became Sofia's shadow, her every move scrutinized by cold, accusing eyes. The fragile piece was an illusion, a beautiful lie that Olivia felt a desperate, painful duty to expose. One rainy afternoon, the fragile truce shattered. Sofia had managed to get the twins and Mia engaged in a board game in the living room. Little Isabella was asleep in her arms. The game was simple, and soon the girls were lost in the innocent competition. Sofia landed on a lucky space and let out a squeal of delight. Chloe, in a fit of mock frustration, playfully tossed a pillow at her. Soon, all 3 girls were giggling, their laughter echoing in the vast marble-floored room. It was a pure, unburdened sound, the kind of sound Ethan had thought was extinct in this house. He was walking down the grand staircase when he heard it. He froze, one hand on the polished banister, his heart clenching in his chest. Laughter. Real, genuine laughter. It was so unexpected, so powerful, it felt like a physical blow. A wave of gratitude for the quiet woman in the simple grey dress washed over him, so potent it brought tears to his eyes. For the first time in 8 months, he felt the crushing weight on his chest lift, just for a moment, and he could breathe. He stood there, hidden in the shadows of the stairway, just listening. He wanted to tattoo the sound onto his memory, but as he looked across the foyer, he saw he wasn't the only one watching. Olivia stood in the doorway of the dining room, a silent, rigid figure, but her face held none of the wonder and relief that filled his own. Her expression was a storm of raw anguish, her eyes glistening with unshed tears of fury. She wasn't just watching her sisters laugh with the maid. She was watching her mother disappear. The sound that was a symphony of hope to Ethan was, to Olivia, a funeral dirge. The fragile piece had a sound. It was the whisper of slippered feet on marble where combat boots had once stomped. It was the gentle clinking of spoons in cereal bowls instead of the crash of them against the wall. Most of all, it was the sound of laughter, a timid, fluttering thing that had begun to nest in the corners of the cavernous house. For weeks, this new melody had been composing itself under Sofia Reyes's quiet direction, a symphony of healing that Ethan Reed listened to from the solitude of his study, feeling a gratitude so profound it was almost painful. But for Olivia, 12 years old and the self-appointed sentinel of her mother's memory, this new music was a cacophony, an erasure. Every giggle from the twins, every whispered secret Mia shared with Sofia, was a note of betrayal in the sacred silence of their grief. The resistance began subtly, like a hairline fracture in a priceless vase. It started with small acts of misdirection. Sofia's favorite worn copy of 100 Years of Solitude, which she read during her brief lunch breaks, vanished from the kitchen counter, only to reappear a week later at the bottom of a laundry basket, its pages warped and smelling of fabric softener. A message from Ethan, scribbled on a notepad asking Sofia to please schedule a dentist appointment for Emma, was found torn into confetti inside the trash compactor. Olivia would watch from a doorway, her face an unreadable mask, as Sofia would simply sigh, retrieve her damp book, or make a mental note to ask Ethan about the appointment again. There was no anger, no confrontation, and that, more than anything, fueled Olivia's fury. Sofia's calm was a form of dismissal, a quiet refusal to acknowledge that a war had been declared. So Olivia escalated her campaign. She began to sow seeds of doubt among her younger sisters, her words coated in the sweet poison of nostalgia. One afternoon, a 7-year-old Chloe proudly showed Sofia a drawing of their family, 6 girls, a tall father, and now a new smiling figure with dark, kind eyes. Olivia drifted into the sunroom. "It's nice," she said, her voice deceptively soft as she peered over Sofia's shoulder. "But Mommy's hair wasn't brown like that. It was like honey in the sun. Don't you remember?" Chloe's smile faltered. She looked from her drawing to Sofia's dark hair, and a shadow of confusion crossed her face. Later, when Mia was humming a Spanish lullaby Sofia had taught her, Olivia appeared again. "Mommy used to sing us French songs," she stated, not as a memory but as a correction. "We shouldn't forget them." She was turning the memory of their mother not into a comfort, but into a standard against which Sofia could only fail. The younger girls, caught in this emotional crossfire, grew anxious. The easy laughter became hesitant again. They would look to Olivia for approval before speaking to Sofia, their small faces etched with a conflict they couldn't articulate. Sofia felt the shift immediately. The warmth that had begun to permeate the house was being leached away, replaced by a familiar, chilling draft. She saw the source of it in Olivia's stormy grey eyes, eyes so like her father's, but filled with a pain he kept locked away. She recognized the desperation, the frantic need to hold onto a ghost before it faded completely. She saw a mirror of her own fears from 5 years ago. The open challenge came on a Tuesday. Ethan had left early for a meeting in the city, and the house was quiet. Sofia had asked the girls to clear their breakfast dishes, a simple request that had, over the past month, become a routine. Emma, Mia, and the twins complied, their movements slow and reluctant under Olivia's watchful gaze. But Olivia remained seated, her chin jutted out, her spoon frozen over her uneaten oatmeal. "Olivia, your bowl, please," Sofia said gently, her voice even. Olivia looked up, her eyes cold and hard. "You're the maid," she said, each word a carefully polished stone of contempt. "It's your job to clean up after us." The other girls froze. Emma's eyes widened and Mia looked down at the floor as if searching for a place to hide. It was the first time the word had been used as a weapon inside the house. Sofia didn't flinch. She simply held Olivia's gaze for a long moment. The air in the enormous kitchen grew thick and heavy, charged with the unspoken history of 17 nannies who had broken against this same granite will. "Yes," Sofia said finally, her voice still quiet, but carrying a weight that made the room feel smaller. "It is my job to help keep this house in order, and a house is not in order when the people inside it do not help one another." She turned and walked to the sink, leaving Olivia's bowl on the table, an island of defiance in the polished mahogany sea. It was a victory for Olivia, but it felt hollow. Sofia hadn't yelled, hadn't threatened to call her father. She had simply absorbed the blow and defined the terms of their conflict not as one of authority, but of community. It was a language Olivia didn't know how to fight. The breaking point arrived on a rainy Friday afternoon. The relentless drizzle outside matched the gloom that had resettled over the mansion. Sofia, sensing the growing tension, had suggested they spend the afternoon adding to the memory wall in the sunroom. The wall had become the heart of their healing. It was covered in photographs, in drawings made by the girls, in pressed flowers from the garden Eleanor had loved. It was a living, breathing collage of their love for her. The younger girls, eager for a distraction, had agreed. Mia drew a picture of her mother teaching her to ride a bike. The twins collaborated on a vibrant, chaotic painting of a family picnic under a smiling sun. Even 2-year-old Isabella, guided by Sofia's hand, had made a bright red handprint on a piece of paper that Sofia carefully tacked to the wall. Olivia had refused to participate. She sat curled in a large armchair in the corner of the sunroom, a book open on her lap, though her eyes never moved across the page. She watched. She watched as her sisters laughed, their heads bent together over crayons and glitter. She watched as Sofia pointed to an empty space and suggested they put Isabella's handprint right next to a smiling photo of Eleanor. She saw her sisters' love for their mother being filtered through this stranger, this quiet intruder, who was rearranging their grief into something tidy and manageable. To Olivia, it was sacrilege. Their grief was supposed to be immense, untamable, a monument as grand and cold as the house itself. Sofia was turning it into a craft project. The final unbearable insult came when Emma, beaming with pride, held up a new photograph she'd found. It was a candid shot of Eleanor, her head thrown back in laughter, taken on a beach vacation years ago. "Look," Emma exclaimed, "we can put this one right in the middle." Sofia smiled, her face illuminated by the genuine joy in Emma's voice. "That's a beautiful idea, Ems. It's perfect." That was it. The casual affection in the nickname, the easy way Sofia agreed, as if she had any right to curate their mother's life. It was a final, careless step onto holy ground. The book slid from Olivia's lap, hitting the floor with a dull thud. The sound was ignored. All eyes were on the laughing photograph of Eleanor, all except Sofia's. For a fleeting second, her eyes met Olivia's across the room, and in them Olivia saw not triumph but a deep, aching pity. It was more than she could bear. She waited until the house was quiet. She waited until the younger girls were in their rooms for their afternoon quiet time, and Sofia was in the laundry room, the distant hum of the dryer the only sound in the house. Then she walked into the sunroom. The rain beat a mournful rhythm against the glass ceiling. The memory wall glowed softly in the grey light, a cheerful beacon of everything she had lost and everything she was now losing. Her movements were deliberate, not frantic. Her heart wasn't racing with anger. It was beating with a slow, heavy rhythm of purpose. This was not a tantrum. This was a reclamation. She started with the twins' chaotic picnic scene. Her fingers were steady as she pulled the thumbtacks from the corkboard. She didn't look at the drawing as she tore it precisely in half, then in quarters, letting the pieces flutter to the floor. Next was Mia's bicycle ride. Tear. Then Chloe's family portrait, the one with the smiling stranger in it. Tear. The pressed flowers crumbled in her hands, their dusty, sweet scent a ghostly perfume in the air. She worked her way across the wall, a silent, methodical angel of destruction, dismantling their fragile piece by piece. She left the photographs of her mother untouched, but she tore away everything surrounding them, isolating them in a field of ruin. Finally, she stood before Isabella's small red handprint. It was tacked right next to the laughing beach photo of Eleanor, just as Sofia had suggested. For a moment, she hesitated. This was a piece of her baby sister, but it was a piece that had been offered to Sofia, sanctified by her approval. With a surge of cold resolve, she ripped it from the wall, shredding the innocent mark until it was nothing but red and white confetti in her fist. When she was done, the floor around her was a snowfield of destroyed memories. The wall was a wasteland, dotted only by the isolated, staring faces of her mother. It was silent again. The right kind of silent, the silence of a tomb. Ethan came home early, the city meeting having ended sooner than expected. He walked in, shrugging off his raincoat, the scent of wet pavement clinging to him. He was anticipating the low hum of the house, the quiet order that Sofia had brought. He was halfway to his study when he noticed the unnatural stillness. It wasn't the peaceful quiet he had grown accustomed to. It was the suffocating silence of before. A knot of dread tightened in his stomach. He followed the silence to its source, the sunroom. He stopped dead in the doorway. The scene before him was one of utter devastation. The floor was littered with the colorful confetti of his daughter's love and effort. The memory wall, once a vibrant tapestry of healing, was now a scarred, empty space, punctuated by the lonely, smiling photos of his dead wife. In the center of the room stood Olivia, her back to him, her small shoulders rigid, and near the window, half hidden in the shadows, was Sofia. She wasn't crying. She was just standing there, her hands clasped in front of her, looking at the wreckage with an expression of profound, bottomless sorrow. She wasn't looking at the ruined drawings. She was looking at Olivia. As Ethan watched, frozen, Olivia slowly turned. Her face was pale, her jaw set, but her eyes were swimming in unshed tears, a maelstrom of anguish and defiance. She looked from the ruined wall to her father, a silent, desperate plea in her gaze. "Do you see? Do you finally see what she was trying to do?" Ethan's eyes flickered from his eldest daughter's raw, broken heart to Sofia's quiet devastation. He was trapped between the ghost he couldn't let go of and the woman who had taught his family how to breathe again, and in that terrible, silent moment, he had no idea which way to turn. The silence in the mansion was a physical weight, heavier and more suffocating than the grief that had preceded it. It pressed down on the marble floors, absorbed the light from the crystal chandeliers, and filled the spaces between each shuddering breath. Ethan stood in the doorway of the sunroom, a place that had, for a few precious weeks, become the heart of his home again. Now it was a graveyard, scraps of colored paper, the ghosts of his daughter's drawings, littered the floor like fallen leaves. A single stark photograph of Eleanor, his beautiful, vibrant Eleanor, lay amidst the wreckage, a cruel smile-like tear marring her face. His gaze shifted from the devastation to the two figures at its center. Olivia, his firstborn, was curled into a tight ball on the window seat, her shoulders trembling with silent, violent sobs. And Sofia. Sofia was kneeling on the floor, her back to him, methodically picking up the larger pieces of paper. There was no anger in her movements, only a quiet, deliberate grace that felt utterly alien in the face of such deliberate destruction. He felt a familiar, useless rage build in his chest. He wanted to shout, to demand an explanation from Olivia, to restore order through the sheer force of his will, the way he did in boardrooms. But the sight of Sofia's quiet sorrow and Olivia's brokenness paralyzed him. He was a commander without a strategy, a king in a ruined castle. For a long moment, no one moved. The only sound was the rustle of paper, as Sofia gathered the torn memories into a neat pile. She didn't try to salvage them, to piece them back together. She simply collected the fragments, honoring what they had been. Finally, Sofia rose. She walked not to the trash can but to a small side table, where she placed the pile of shredded art as if it were a sacred offering. Then, she turned and walked toward the window seat. Ethan tensed, expecting a confrontation, a reprimand, some form of discipline that he himself didn't know how to administer. But Sofia did none of those things. She simply sat down on the floor in front of Olivia, tucking her legs beneath her. She didn't touch her, she didn't speak, she just sat, her presence a silent testament, a quiet anchor in the storm of the 12-year-old's grief. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Olivia's sobs slowly subsided, replaced by hitched, ragged breaths. She kept her face buried in her knees, refusing to look up. "I know you hate me." Olivia's voice was a muffled whisper, raw with tears. Sofia's reply was so soft Ethan had to strain to hear it. "No, Olivia, I don't hate you. You should. I ruined everything. I wanted to hurt you." "I know," Sofia said, and the simple affirmation held no accusation. It was just a statement of fact, filled with an understanding that defied logic. "You were successful." Olivia finally lifted her head, her eyes red-rimmed and swollen, a challenge glinting through her tears. "So, are you going to leave now, like all the others?" The question was a dare, a desperate hope disguised as a taunt. Sofia met her gaze, her own eyes clear and impossibly sad. "Is that what you want?" The question hung in the air, disarming Olivia completely. The girl's defiant mask crumbled, revealing the terrified child beneath. Her lower lip trembled. I don't know," she stammered. I don't want them to forget her." A single tear traced a path down Sofia's cheek. "They will never forget her," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "You will never forget her, but you're afraid you will. That's the real fear, isn't it?" Olivia stared, speechless. Sofia continued, her gaze turning inward as if she were looking back through time. "5 years ago," she began, her voice taking on a distant, melodic quality, "my mother died. She had this laugh. It wasn't loud, but it filled up our whole apartment. It sounded like little bells. For the first year after she was gone, I would try to hear it in my head every night before I went to sleep, because I was so terrified that one day I would forget the sound. I thought that if I forgot her laugh, it would be like she was dying all over again." She paused, taking a slow breath. Ethan felt rooted to the spot, an unwilling eavesdropper on a confession of profound sacred grief. He saw Sofia not as the maid, not as the nanny, but as a young woman who had walked this same desolate road. "My little brother, Matteo, he was 7, Sofia went on. "He stopped drawing. He used to draw all the time, pictures of my mother as a queen with a crown of flowers. After she died, he wouldn't touch a crayon. My sister, she started wearing my mother's old sweater even in the summer. It was too big for her, and it smelled like mothballs, but she wouldn't take it off. We were all doing the same thing you're doing, Olivia. We were all holding on so tightly to the pieces of her we had left, because we were afraid that if we let go, even for a second, she would disappear completely." Olivia was listening now, her entire body still, her eyes locked on Sofia's face. The anger had drained out of her, replaced by a raw, aching curiosity. "One day," Sofia said, a faint smile touching her lips, "I found Matteo crying in his room. He told me he couldn't remember if Mama liked red roses or pink roses better. He felt like he had failed her, and I realized what we were doing wasn't honoring her. We were turning her memory into a cage. We were so busy guarding the past that we weren't living." She looked directly at Olivia, her eyes filled with a deep, knowing empathy. "Destroying that wall. It wasn't about hating me, was it? It was about you being afraid that all these new, happy memories were pushing out the old ones. That our laughter was drowning out your mother's." A fresh wave of sobs racked Olivia's body, but this time they were different. They weren't born of anger, but of recognition. It was the sound of a pain that had finally been seen, finally been named. "Yes," she choked out. "Yes." Sofia finally reached out, placing a gentle hand on Olivia's knee. "Love isn't like a glass of water, Olivia. If you pour some out, you have less. Love is like light. A single candle can light 1,000 other candles, and its own flame doesn't get any smaller. Loving new people, making new memories. It doesn't take away from the love you have for your mother. It just makes the room brighter." That was it. That was the moment Ethan's own dam finally broke. The carefully constructed wall of control he had built around his heart for the past 8 months, the facade of the stoic executive, the impenetrable fortress of the grieving widower, it all came crashing down. The sight of this young woman, a near stranger, offering his daughter the exact words of comfort he had been unable to find, shattered him. He stepped into the room, and the sound of his leather shoes on the marble made both of them look up. His voice, when it came, was hoarse, a stranger to his own ears. "She's right." He walked over and knelt down, not beside Sofia, but on the other side of Olivia, completing their broken circle. He looked at his daughter, truly looked at her, and saw not her defiance, but the reflection of his own unbearable pain. "I am so sorry, Liv," he whispered, the words tearing from his throat. "This is my fault. Olivia stared at him, confused. What? He ran a hand through his hair, the gesture ragged and desperate. All of this. Hiring nanny after nanny. I wasn't trying to find someone to help you. I was trying to find someone to replace her. The confession hung in the air, ugly and true. I thought if I could just plug the hole, fix the routine, then everything would go back to normal. That we wouldn't have to feel this emptiness. But all I did was make it worse. I made you feel like she was replaceable. Your mother. Eleanor was not replaceable. His voice broke on her name. He hadn't said it aloud in months without it being in the context of logistics or legalities. Now, it was a prayer. He turned his gaze to Sofia, his eyes swimming with unshed tears. And you, he said, his voice thick with a new, overwhelming emotion. You came in here and you didn't try to replace anything. You saw us. You saw the pieces, and you didn't try to glue them back together into the same shape. You just sat with us in the rubble. Thais, I'm so sorry for putting you in the middle of this. Sofia simply shook her head, her expression one of pure, unadulterated compassion. The wall, Olivia said quietly, looking at the shredded paper. It felt wrong, like we were trying to build a museum for her. Mum wouldn't have wanted to be in a museum. She liked being outside. A thought, fragile and new, sparked in the darkness of Ethan's mind. An idea born not of desperation, but of the shared vulnerability in this ruined room. A garden, he said, the word tasting of hope. She always wanted a proper rose garden, by the east terrace, where the morning sun hits. Olivia looked up, a flicker of something other than pain in her eyes. She loved the white ones, the ones that smelled like lemons. I remember, Ethan said, a genuine smile, the first in a long time touching his lips, and the pink ones that climbed the old stone wall. He looked from Olivia to Sofia, a silent question in his eyes. We could build it for her, he said, his voice gaining strength. Not a memorial to what we lost, but something living, something that grows, a place where we can go and be with her, together. Olivia's gaze shifted to Sofia, her eyes searching. For the first time, she wasn't looking at a threat, at an intruder. She was looking at someone who understood the language of her grief, someone who had given her permission to feel it without being consumed by it. She was looking at an ally. Slowly, hesitantly, Olivia nodded. I think Mom would like that. In the quiet aftermath, a new kind of silence settled over the sunroom. It wasn't the heavy, oppressive silence of before. It was a silence of understanding, of shared sorrow, and of the first tender shoots of a new beginning, pushing their way up through the wreckage of the past. The broken pieces of paper still lay on the table, but they no longer felt like an ending. They felt like the soil from which something beautiful and unexpected was about to grow. 6 months had passed, not as a length of time to be measured in days, but in the accumulation of new sounds. The oppressive silence of the Reed mansion had been replaced by a symphony of ordinary life. The staccato tap of Olivia's laptop keys from the study, where she now did her homework without a fight, was the percussion. The harmonized giggling of Chloe and Sofia, as they built a fortress of cushions in the living room, was the melody. The bass line was the gentle hum of the dishwasher, a sound of domestic normalcy Ethan once took for granted. And conducting it all with a quiet grace that still mystified him was Sofia. Her presence was woven into the very fabric of their new reality. She was the one Mia ran to with a scraped knee, the one who could decipher Isabella's toddler speak, the one who sat with Emma for hours, helping her sketch the birds in the garden until the likeness was just right. The house, once a cold gallery of Ethan's wealth and sorrow, had finally thawed. It breathed again. This morning was a perfect example of the beautiful, controlled chaos that had become their new normal. Ethan stood at the kitchen island, a spatula in hand, a faint dusting of flour on his dark sweater. He was attempting to make pancakes from a recipe he'd found online, and the results were charitably abstract. The girls, all 6 of them, were seated around the enormous breakfast table, a tableau of varying states of wakefulness. Isabella, now nearly 3, had a line of syrup from her chin to her ear. The twins were engaged in a silent, intense negotiation over the last piece of bacon. Olivia, at 13, had an air of serene authority, occasionally glancing up from her book to quell a minor dispute with a single raised eyebrow, a look she'd inherited directly from her mother, but which now held none of its former bitterness. It was a look of loving exasperation, the kind reserved only for family. Sofia moved between them, a calm center in their whirlwind, refilling a glass of milk here, wiping a sticky hand there, her movements fluid and unhurried. She caught Ethan's eye over the sputtering pan and offered him a small, knowing smile that made his chest ache, in a way that was no longer about grief, but about a burgeoning, terrifying hope. He saw her not as the maid he had hired in a fit of desperation, but as the architect of their peace. She hadn't just cleaned their house, she had cleared the debris from their hearts. The change in his daughters was nothing short of miraculous. They still spoke of Eleanor, but the stories were no longer shrouded in pain. They were shared with laughter, with fondness. The memory wall, once a site of such profound conflict, had been rebuilt in a different form. It was now a vibrant, evolving collage in the sunroom, filled with new drawings, photos of school plays, and pressed flowers from the garden, all surrounding a few carefully chosen portraits of their mother. It was a celebration of life, past and present, a testament to Sofia's core belief that love didn't replace, it expanded. But the most profound transformation was in Ethan himself. The 39-year-old titan of Wall Street, who could orchestrate multi-billion-dollar mergers without breaking a sweat, had learned the infinitely more complex art of being present. He left the office at 5:30 now. He attended parent-teacher conferences. He learned the names of his daughter's friends, their favorite songs, their secret fears. He was learning day by day how to be a father again, and Sofia was his teacher, his guide, his quiet inspiration. He'd found himself watching her constantly, studying the way she listened, the way her presence could soothe a brewing storm, the way she saw the goodness in his children, even when they were at their worst. The feeling that grew within him was a slow, rising tide, an undeniable current of admiration, respect, and a love so deep and unexpected it left him breathless. He knew it was a love that defied convention. He was Ethan Reed, his life chronicled in the glossy pages of financial magazines. She was Sofia Reyes, a young woman from Queens who had come to his house to clean. The world would see a cliché, a story of power and position. But he saw the truth. He saw a woman of immense strength, of profound emotional intelligence, of a quiet nobility that had nothing to do with lineage or bank accounts. She had saved his family, she had saved him. The fear of what people might think, a fear that had once dictated so much of his life, now felt like a distant, irrelevant noise. His only fear was a future without her in it. The decision, when it finally crystallized in his mind, felt less like a choice and more like an inevitability. The only logical conclusion to the path they had been walking together for months. He had to tell her. He had to offer her not a better position or a higher salary, but everything. That evening, after the last bedtime story had been read and the house had settled into a peaceful quiet, he found her in the sunroom, standing before the memory wall. The soft glow of a single lamp illuminated her face as she gently straightened a drawing made by the twins. He stood in the doorway for a moment, simply watching her. The thought of Eleanor was there, not as a ghost of guilt, but as a gentle presence, a soft, approving whisper in the back of his mind. He had spoken to Olivia earlier in the week, his voice hesitant as he tried to articulate the feelings he could no longer contain. His eldest daughter had looked at him, her gaze wise beyond her years, and said, "Dad, Sofia didn't make us forget, Mom. She helped us remember how to be happy." That blessing was all the permission he needed. He stepped into the room, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Sofia," he said, his voice softer than he intended. She turned, a question in her eyes. "I need to talk to you." He didn't lead her to his imposing study or the formal living room. He led her out onto the terrace, where the cool night air was scented with the blooming roses from Eleanor's garden. They stood in the quiet darkness, the distant lights of the city twinkling on the horizon. "When you first came here," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "this house was just a structure. It was full of expensive things and broken hearts. I was a stranger to my own children. I was lost. He looked at her, his gaze direct and unwavering. You did more than bring order. You brought life back. You brought light. You healed us, Sofia. You healed me. Her expression was unreadable in the dim light, but he saw the gentle shimmer of tears in her eyes. I know what the world looks like, he continued, pressing on before he lost his nerve. I know the difference in our circumstances, but none of that matters to me. What matters is who you are. What matters is that my daughters love you, and I love you. The words hung in the air between them, fragile and momentous. I'm not offering you a job anymore. I'm not asking you to be a nanny or a governess. I'm asking you to be my partner in raising these girls, in building this life. I'm asking you to stay, not as an employee, but as part of our family, as part of my life. Sofia was silent for a long moment, her gaze searching his. He could see the universe of her own past, her own losses, her own quiet struggles reflected in her eyes. When she finally spoke, her voice was a steady whisper. Ethan, I stopped seeing this as a job a long time ago. She took a small step closer, her hand finding his. This is my home, they are my family, you are. A single tear traced a path down her cheek, but she was smiling. It was a smile that held all the promise of a new dawn, a smile that lit up the darkness and sealed their future. In that moment, under the quiet watch of the stars, the billionaire and the maid disappeared, and all that remained were two people who had found in each other's broken pieces a way to become whole again. The following Sunday was bright and warm, a perfect autumn afternoon. The entire family was gathered in the rose garden, a space that had transformed from a painful memorial into a living symbol of their journey. They were planting a new bush, a delicate white bloom, in honor of Isabella's 3rd birthday. Ethan watched as Sofia knelt in the soft earth, showing Isabella how to pat the soil around the base of the plant. The little girl's tiny hands were covered in dirt, her face a mask of serious concentration. One by one, the other girls joined in, adding a small handful of soil, their laughter echoing through the garden. Olivia stood beside Ethan, leaning her head against his shoulder for a moment. He wrapped his arm around her, his heart so full it felt like it might burst. He looked at Sofia, who glanced up and met his gaze, her eyes shining with a love that was as real and tangible as the ground beneath their feet. He knelt down beside her, placing his hand over hers and Isabella's, a family reborn, not from the ashes of their past, but from the fertile ground of their shared healing, their roots intertwined, reaching together toward the sun. In the end, a home is not built from marble and stone, but from the quiet moments of connection that weave a family together. The story of the Reeds is not one of tragedy overcome, but of love rediscovered in the most unexpected of places. It shows us that the deepest wounds, when tended with patience and empathy, can become the soil for the most beautiful gardens. This is what we believe in, sharing stories that remind us of the incredible resilience of the human heart. If this story touched you, if it reminded you of the power of love to heal, show your support by liking this video and share it with someone who might need to see that a new beginning is always possible. Subscribe to join a community that celebrates the courage it takes to love again, because in every ending, there is the seed of a new story waiting to be told. Thank you for listening.